Hello, I'm Zuhal Reed, Senior Attorney in Medmarc's Risk Management Department, and I would like to welcome you to Medmarc's Risk Management video series on clinical trials. This is part 6 of our series, where we'll be focusing on a comparison of clinical trials in the US and the UK. In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at how the UK clinical trial approval process differs from that of the FDA here in the United States. Our goal is to help US-based clinical trial sponsors better understand what to expect if they're considering running a trial in the UK, whether that's to support FDA approval, to enter the UK market, or as part of a broader global strategy. Now, let's move on to one of the most important foundational questions. What do US clinical trial sponsors need to know when considering a trial outside the United States? First, it's essential to understand that foreign clinical trial data can be used for FDA approval, but must meet 21 CFR 312.120 requirements. This means the trial must be conducted in accordance with good clinical practice, with proper ethics committee oversight and informed consent. Just because the trial takes place overseas doesn't mean it's automatically acceptable to the FDA. The regulatory bar is still high. Second, regulatory frameworks differ across countries. Approval in one country does not guarantee FDA acceptance. Each regulatory body has its own standards, its own risk tolerance, and its own approach to evaluating clinical data. So even if your product is approved in the UK, that doesn't mean the FDA will reach the same conclusion. Your trial strategy should be tailored to meet the specific expectations of each jurisdiction. Third, ethical approvals and data protection laws vary. Compliance with UK GDPR versus US HIPAA is crucial. This is especially important for sponsors unfamiliar with the broader scope of GDPR. Unlike HIPAA, which applies only to certain types of entities in the US healthcare system, UK GDPR governs all personal data collected during the trial, and it gives participants broader rights over how their information is used. Failing to understand those differences can lead to compliance issues and delays. And finally, approval timelines and regulatory hurdles impact trial feasibility. Some locations offer faster approval than the US. For example, the UK offers a streamlined clinical trial authorization process through the MHRA, which can result in faster startup times. But sponsors still need to account for the local ethics review and potential differences in how trial protocols are evaluated. So while the appeal of conducting trials abroad is clear, whether it's faster enrollment or broader market reach, sponsors shouldn't treat it as a shortcut. The key takeaway here is to approach international trials with the same, if not greater, level of diligence as US-based studies. Engage with local regulatory experts early. Build your trial design with both FDA and foreign regulators in mind, and ensure your data practices are compliant across jurisdictions. Now, let's talk about why the UK is such an attractive destination for clinical trials, and why US sponsors in particular may want to give it serious consideration. The UK's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or MHRA, offers a streamlined process that can move significantly quicker than both the EU's centralized system and the FDA's IND pathway. Another major benefit is the centralized access to patients through the NHS. Unlike the fragmented recruitment landscape in many countries, the UK's national healthcare system allows for more efficient patient identification, enrollment, and follow-up, all of which can keep your trial on schedule. You'll also find fewer bureaucratic hurdles compared to EU trials, which often require navigating multiple country-specific ethics and regulatory approvals. In the UK, that process is far more consolidated. But it's not without its trade-offs. The UK is a smaller market than the US or EU, which means the commercial payoff may be more limited unless it's part of a broader global strategy. And just because you conduct a trial in the UK, it doesn't mean you're automatically meeting FDA expectations. The UK regulations don't fully align with the FDA requirements. So US sponsors may still need to do additional work to ensure that the data will be acceptable for US approval. In other words, the UK can be a smart, strategic choice, but only if you plan carefully and make sure your trial design is tailored to meet the regulatory expectations on both sides of the Atlantic. Let's now look at some of the key differences between the UK and US clinical trial approval processes, differences that can directly impact your trial planning and timelines. First, the regulatory bodies. In the UK, clinical trials are overseen by the MHRA. In the US, the counterpart is the FDA, specifically through the IND process. Second, the approval process itself differs. In the UK, you'll need a clinical trial authorization, or CTA, along with separate ethics approval. In the US, trials go through an IND submission, which includes FDA review and IRB oversight. Third, the timelines. The MHRA typically completes its review in about 30 days, which can be quicker than the FDA process, particularly if there's a back and forth communication that slows things down. Fourth, ethical oversight. In the UK, this is handled by a centralized research ethics committee system, making the process more uniform. In contrast, the US relies on site-specific IRBs, which can lead to variability and delay. And finally, both countries follow ICH good clinical practice, but their data protection laws, UK GDPR versus US HIPAA, differ significantly, and sponsors need to be mindful of that when handling patient data. Before we wrap up, let's quickly highlight a few major red flags and legal pitfalls that US sponsors should be aware of when running clinical trials in the UK. First is data protection and UK GDPR compliance. The UK's data privacy laws are significantly stricter than HIPAA in the US, and they apply to all personal data, not just health records. Failure to comply with UK GDPR can lead to regulatory delays, hefty fines, and even trial disruptions, especially when data is being transferred internationally. Next are insurance and indemnification requirements. The UK mandates that sponsors have specific clinical trial insurance policies, and those may look very different from the coverage typically used in the US. If you are conducting your trial through NHS facilities, you'll need to put indemnity agreements in place. These agreements can carry unexpected liability exposure if not negotiated carefully, so it's important to work with local experts. Finally, keep in mind that there are regulatory differences for drugs and medical devices. For example, medical devices in the UK don't require an IDE like they do in the US, but you still need MHRA approval, and the expectations around clinical evidence can also differ. Additionally, pharmacovigilance reporting requirements. So that is, how do you report adverse events? They are stricter and more actively enforced in the UK, particularly for post-market surveillance. So while the UK offers a relatively streamlined path for getting your trial off the ground, it's critical to be aware of missteps that can lead to delay or legal exposure. This concludes our discussion on clinical trials in the UK and what US sponsors need to know when navigating the regulatory landscape abroad. Join us for our next video where we'll dive into the clinical trial approval process in the EU and Canada and explore why these two regions are especially relevant for US clinical trial sponsors. Thank you.